Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. It happened on one of those evenings that carried a quiet weight in the air, the kind where the streets seemed to hum with a life of their own. The sun had already dipped behind the horizon, leaving a soft, golden afterglow that clung to the tops of the houses. I remember clutching my coat a little tighter around my shoulders as I walked home from the small market near my street. The air was cool, not unkind, but cool enough to remind me that autumn was settling in. I had bags in both hands, nothing heavy, just bread, some fruit, and a bouquet of daisies I couldn't resist buying. The streets weren't empty, but they weren't exactly alive either. A few cars passed, their headlights brushing the pavement, and a couple of neighbors were out in their yards, finishing their day. I walked slowly, deliberately, enjoying the rhythm of my own footsteps. But that's when I noticed another rhythm, softer, quieter, but present. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Someone walking in the same direction, maybe heading home, too. But every time I turned a corner, every time I adjusted my pace, the sound lingered just a little behind me. There was something about the silence of it that caught my attention. Whoever it was, they weren't rushing. They weren't calling out. They were just there. I told myself not to be foolish. After all, I've lived in this neighborhood for years, and I know almost everyone. Still, a small knot of tension began to form in my stomach, the kind you feel when the unknown brushes just a little too close. I shifted my grocery bags to one side and glanced quickly over my shoulder. That's when I saw him. He was about 10 paces back, his hands tucked into the pockets of a dark jacket. His head was slightly lowered, but not in a way that seemed threatening. More like he was caught in his own thoughts. His steps were measured, his gaze steady, and when our eyes met for a brief second, he gave a small nod, subtle, almost shy. I quickened my pace a little, not because I was afraid, but because I was curious about whether he would do the same. He didn't. He kept his rhythm, steady and unhurried, as though his only purpose was to be present, not invasive. By the time I reached the row of houses that led to mine, I found myself oddly unsettled, not by fear, but by a sense of recognition I couldn't quite place. There was something familiar in his face, though I couldn't name it. Maybe it was the eyes, maybe the way he carried himself. Something stirred a memory just beyond my reach. When I finally reached my gate, I hesitated. I set my grocery bags down for a moment and turned fully toward him. "Excuse me," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "Can I help you with something?" He stopped a few feet away, lifting his head just enough for the porch light of my neighbor's house to catch his features. His face was calm, worn with lines that spoke of years and stories of his own. He looked at me as though he was searching for words carefully, like someone who didn't want to say the wrong thing. "No," he said finally, his voice even and low. "I was just making sure you got home safe." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. It was such a simple statement, almost old-fashioned in its kindness. Yet, there was a gravity in the way he said it, as if there was more to his presence than just chance. I studied him more closely, noticing the faint tiredness around his eyes, the way his jacket looked like it had seen better days. He didn't look like a stranger who meant harm. He looked like someone carrying something heavy, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt that weight settle gently on me too. I picked up my groceries again and gave him a small smile. "Well, thank you. That's kind of you." He nodded again, almost as if my acknowledgement meant more to him than it should have. And then, without another word, he turned slightly, as though he'd continue walking down the street. But I could tell he was lingering, waiting to see if I would say something else, if I would invite him into the conversation that hung so delicately between us. I didn't, not that night. Instead, I watched as he walked away, his figure disappearing into the quiet rhythm of the street. I stood there a little longer than I needed to, wondering why his presence had left such an impression on me. Why his silence had spoken louder than most words I'd heard in years. Later that evening, as I set the daisies into a vase and watched their yellow petals open in the kitchen light, I realized something unexpected had begun. Not a fear, not a worry, but a thread of curiosity that tugged gently at me. Who was he? Why had he chosen to follow me home, not with menace, but with something almost protective? I couldn't shake the thought. His shadow had walked behind me, but his presence lingered within me. And I knew, deep down, this was only the beginning of a story I hadn't asked for but somehow needed. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the soft ticking of the clock on my nightstand, I caught myself wondering if I would see him again. And though I didn't know his name, I knew I wouldn't forget the way his quiet footsteps had matched mine, carrying a silence that seemed to speak directly to my heart. The next evening arrived with the same gentle hush that seemed to follow the town like a soft, persistent breeze. I had just finished tidying up the kitchen after dinner, the warm glow of the lights reflecting off the polished counters. The daisies I had placed in the vase yesterday still held their bright yellow petals, almost like a reminder of something unexpected, something that lingered in the corners of my mind. I was stepping out onto the porch for a breath of fresh air when I saw him again. He wasn't hiding this time. He was standing near the end of my street, hands still tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket, his posture relaxed but attentive. The first instinct that surged through me was that familiar mix of curiosity and cautious excitement. How did he know I'd be here again? Or was it just coincidence? "Good evening," I called out softly, trying to sound casual, though my heart had picked up an eager rhythm. "Evening," he replied, a small smile brushing his lips. This time, it felt less like a stranger's politeness and more like recognition, an acknowledgement of the memory that had formed yesterday. He stepped a little closer, stopping at a respectful distance that suggested patience and careful observation. "Are you following me again?" I asked, half in jest, half in genuine curiosity. The words felt strange leaving my mouth, but I couldn't think of another way to put it. He chuckled quietly, a low, warm sound that felt as if it had been waiting for this moment to break the silence. "I suppose you could say that," he admitted. "But only because I felt drawn to make sure you were safe. I didn't mean to alarm you." I nodded, sensing the sincerity in his tone. There was something calming about the way he spoke, something that suggested a life lived with thoughtfulness and reflection. He wasn't brash or demanding. He was steady, like a presence that could be trusted even without knowing him fully. The street was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. I realized how rare this kind of silence felt, not lonely, but intimate. It felt as though the world had softened around us just enough for two strangers to meet in a pause between days. "I'm Marjorie," I said finally, extending my hand out of habit, though it felt almost ceremonial in this strange, delicate moment. "James," he replied, taking my hand gently. His grip was firm but considerate, a handshake that carried respect rather than formality. Our hands lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and I felt the warmth of a human connection that wasn't forced, wasn't urgent, just present. We spoke then, slowly at first, trading small stories about our days. I told him about the market, about the bouquets that caught my eye, about the little rituals I held to keep the evenings calm and comforting. He listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak, but truly listening. And then, when it was his turn, he shared pieces of his life with a gentle honesty that drew me in. He spoke of the streets he had walked as a child, of the people he had known and the places that had shaped him. There was a rhythm in our conversation, an ebb and flow that felt natural, like two old friends meeting again after a long absence, even though we had only just met. I noticed the subtle gestures, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking, the careful pauses he took before speaking, the slight softening in his eyes whenever he looked at me. Hours seemed to condense into moments. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows that danced across the pavement. I found myself leaning slightly forward, as if proximity could somehow capture the essence of this connection, and I could see in his gaze that he felt it too. Neither of us pressed, neither of us rushed. There was no expectation, only presence. As the night grew deeper, I realized that the weight I had felt the day before, the quiet tension of not knowing, had transformed. It was no longer unease, it was anticipation, a tender curiosity for what tomorrow might bring. I wanted to ask him to stay longer, to walk with me down the quiet streets, to see the town through the eyes of someone who had suddenly become meaningful. Instead, he smiled softly, giving me that same small nod that had first caught my attention. "I should let you rest," he said, though there was a reluctance in his tone, a sense that leaving was difficult for him too. I nodded, feeling a tug of disappointment, but also a strange comfort. "Yes, but I'll see you again," I said, almost as if speaking it aloud would make it inevitable. He gave that nod again, the kind that felt like a promise without words, and then he walked away slowly, fading into the shadows of the street. I watched until he disappeared, then stood on the porch a little longer, feeling the cool air settle around me that night. As I prepared for bed, I realized how much his presence had shifted something inside me. It wasn't just curiosity or intrigue, it was a sense of being seen, of connection in a world that often moved too quickly to notice the quiet details of life. And I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that this story, our story, was only beginning to unfold. Even as I lay in bed, listening to the faint hum of the night outside my window, I could feel his presence lingering in the edges of my thoughts, a gentle reminder that sometimes the unexpected could bring the deepest forms of connection. I drifted to sleep that night with the quiet hope that tomorrow, our paths would cross again. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I understood that when it did, everything would feel just a little more significant than it had the day before. The following week felt different from the usual rhythm of my days. There was a quiet expectation that hovered around me, subtle but insistent, like the soft vibration of a distant bell. I went about my routines: morning coffee on the porch, a slow walk to the corner store, tending to the small garden behind my house, but there was a layer of awareness I couldn't shake. I found myself glancing down the street, half expecting to see him waiting, or even just walking toward me, and, unsurprisingly, he was there again. This time, he didn't wait at the end of the street. He walked toward me at a measured pace, his steps slow but confident, as if he had rehearsed the art of approaching without imposing. I noticed immediately how natural it felt, the way our eyes met before words were even spoken. "Good afternoon, Marjorie," he said, his voice warm and steady, carrying the same quiet calm that had drawn me in from the very beginning. "James," I replied, smiling before I realized it. The ease between us had grown over these brief encounters, and it surprised me how quickly his presence had become familiar. We decided, almost unspokenly, to walk together that afternoon. The neighborhood, usually so mundane and ordinary in its small-town charm, took on a kind of gentle intimacy. The leaves rustled with a sound that seemed to mirror our steps, and the late afternoon sun cast a honeyed glow across the pavements. Every small detail, the curve of a wrought iron fence, the soft flicker of a porch light in the distance, seemed to anchor us in a shared moment. As we walked, our conversation deepened. I told him about my childhood home, the summers spent under the shade of the old oak trees, and the little rituals that gave comfort to my days now. James listened, not just hearing the words but absorbing the pauses, the subtle hesitations, the small inflections that revealed more than the story itself. He shared more of his life too, though always gently, carefully. He spoke of the years he had spent moving from town to town, of the quiet jobs that had shaped him, and of the few people who had left lasting marks on his heart. His stories were filled with moments of reflection, the kind that spoke of a man who had learned to notice life's nuances and had a respect for the quiet corners where truth often hid. I realized, as we walked, that there was a rhythm forming between us. Not the rhythm of urgency or expectation, but a cadence of understanding, of mutual respect, of small, deliberate acknowledgement. It was as if we had discovered a language that existed only between us, made up of glances, soft smiles, and the occasional shared laugh. At one point, we paused at a small park. The swings swayed gently in the late breeze, and the benches were empty, save for a few scattered leaves. I sat down, brushing my hands on the wooden slats, and he chose a bench nearby, close enough to maintain the connection but far enough to preserve comfort. We spoke of simpler things then: the beauty of quiet moments, the importance of being seen and understood, the subtle ways life offered connection if one only noticed. There was no rush, no pressure. The afternoon stretched out around us, long and golden, as if the day itself had decided to linger in our company. I remember feeling a strange, delicate weight in my chest, not heavy, not burdensome, but significant in its presence. It was a feeling that told me this was more than casual coincidence. That our meetings, these carefully unhurried encounters, were shaping something unexpected yet profoundly real. James leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "It's rare, you know," he said softly, almost to himself, "to find someone whose company feels like a safe place." I looked at him, studying the subtle lines around his eyes, the way the corners of his mouth hinted at a past both complicated and kind. "I know what you mean," I replied, my voice low and steady. "It's rare to feel understood without trying to explain everything." There was a silence that followed, one of those comfortable silences that seemed to carry more meaning than any words could. I realized then that this quiet understanding, this gentle connection, was becoming the heart of our story. As the sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and amber, we rose from the benches together. The walk home was slower this time, deliberate, savoring the waning light. I noticed how our steps seemed almost in sync now, a subtle echo of the first time he had followed me home, the quiet presence that had begun it all. When I reached my gate, I turned to him, sensing the unspoken question in the pause between us. "Will you walk again tomorrow?" I asked, not pressing, simply offering the hope that our shared rhythm could continue. He smiled, a small but genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Yes, I think I will," he said, and somehow, that simple promise felt like a treasure. I watched him walk away again, fading into the soft shadows of the street, and as I closed the gate behind me, I realized that something inside me had shifted completely. What had begun as a curious encounter, a moment of unexpected concern, had blossomed into a quiet, profound bond. That night, I lay in bed thinking of the afternoon, of the shared laughter, the gentle understanding, and the delicate tension of anticipation that now threaded through my days. I understood then that our connection was not just about the meetings, the walks, or even the conversations. It was about the presence we offered each other, a rare gift in a world that often overlooked such quiet treasures. And I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that this was only the beginning of something that would leave a lasting imprint on both our lives. The following days were painted with a quiet anticipation, the kind that hums beneath the surface of ordinary life and makes each small moment feel richer, more deliberate. I found myself looking forward to the evening walks with James more than I expected, savoring the gentle rhythm of our footsteps and the unspoken understanding that had begun to grow between us. It wasn't romance in the conventional sense, at least not yet. It was something subtler, something that touched a deeper part of the heart: recognition, respect, and the comfort of shared presence. That evening, as I stepped out of my front door, I saw him waiting, leaning slightly against a lamppost as though the street itself had become part of his quiet vigil. The light caught the edges of his face, highlighting the lines that told stories of years lived with care, struggle, and reflection. I felt a warmth spread through me, not the kind born of passion, but a softer, more enduring warmth that comes from knowing someone notices you, truly notices you, in the way the world so rarely allows. "Evening, Marjorie," he greeted, his voice carrying the same calm strength that had drawn me to him from the very beginning. "Evening, James," I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. We set off together, walking slowly down familiar streets that now seemed transformed, touched by the significance of our shared presence. The leaves crunched underfoot, and a soft breeze carried the scent of damp earth and early fall blossoms. I found myself talking more freely than ever before, sharing thoughts and memories I'd often kept tucked away, about hopes, regrets, and the lessons that came with age. James listened with a patience that felt like a rare gift, responding not with judgment but with thoughtful reflection. He shared stories too, the quiet triumphs of ordinary days, the subtle lessons learned from long walks and fleeting encounters. Each word, each pause, built a bridge between us, stronger than the streets beneath our feet. We arrived at the small park again, the one with the swings and scattered benches, the trees standing sentinel around us. This time, we chose a bench beneath an old oak tree, its branches stretching wide as if to shelter the space beneath them. We sat in companionable silence at first, the fading light painting the world in shades of gold and rose. There was no urgency, no need to fill the silence. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a gentle acknowledgement that we had found something rare in each other's company. "I never expected to meet someone like you," I said quietly, almost to myself, as I traced a finger along the edge of the bench. "Someone who listens, who understands without needing everything explained." James looked at me then, his eyes reflecting the warm glow of the sunset. "It's the rarest kind of connection," he said softly. "Not everyone finds it in a lifetime. I think we've been given a gift." The words hung between us, tender and true, carrying with them a weight that was both grounding and uplifting. I felt a sense of clarity, a quiet understanding that this connection, unexpected, gentle, and profoundly real, was something to honor, to nurture, and to remember. We stayed in that park until the stars began to appear, one by one, delicate pinpricks of light in the deepening sky. Each star seemed to echo the small, shining moments that had brought us together, the shared smiles, the patient listening, the quiet walks. I realized then that the essence of our bond wasn't in grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was in presence, in attention, in the willingness to be part of each other's world without changing it. When it was finally time to part, I felt a pang of reluctance, but also a deep sense of gratitude. "Will I see you tomorrow?" I asked, the question gentle but earnest. He smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "Yes," he replied. "We'll walk again. And I think, this is only the beginning." As I watched him fade into the soft shadows of the street, I realized that the story of our connection had reached a kind of emotional crescendo, not with fireworks or sudden revelations, but with something steadier, quieter, and infinitely more enduring. It was a climax of understanding, trust, and shared presence, the kind that leaves a lasting mark on the heart. Back in my home, as I sat with a cup of tea and watched the night deepen outside my window, I reflected on the past week, the first quiet encounter, the tentative greetings, the shared walks, and the growing trust. I understood that life often offers moments of profound connection in the most unexpected ways, and it is in recognizing and cherishing them that we find real growth. I thought of James then, not as a stranger, not even as a friend in the usual sense, but as a witness to a part of my life that had long been private, quiet, and solitary. In his presence, I had discovered something about myself too, the capacity to trust, to feel seen, and to embrace moments of unexpected beauty without fear or hesitation. And as I finally turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I smiled softly, knowing that this story, our story, would stay with me. It wasn't defined by a dramatic event or a single revelation. It was defined by the quiet accumulation of understanding, patience, and shared humanity. I drifted to sleep that night with a sense of peace, a sense of anticipation for the days to come, and a deep appreciation for the unexpected gift that had entered my life. The presence of someone who walked silently behind me at first, but had, without words, walked into my heart.